Carter. And the child that changed everything. Hope Logan was no stranger to heartbreak. But nothing could have prepared her for the gut punch of finding out she was pregnant. Just days after breaking things off with Carter Walton, the news hit her like a tidal wave. Surreal, terrifying, and laced with the bitter irony that the man she had just walked away from might be the father of her unborn child. It hadn't been an easy decision to end things with Carter. Their connection was undeniable, and they'd shared something deep, electric, and unexpected. But the weight of the past, the shadows of loyalty, and Hope's inner tug-of-war with her feelings had pushed her to step away. Convincing herself it was the right thing. She needed clarity, space, closure. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The test that turned her world upside down. Hope decided early on that she would keep the baby. Regardless of the circumstances. This wasn't about romance or fairy tales. This was about life, raw, real, and irreversible. Still, she knew the father's identity would shape everything. Not just legally or emotionally, but publicly. She was a Logan. He was a Walton. And in the fashion world, especially under the Forrester glare, every move made headlines. The DNA test was supposed to bring clarity, closure, truth, but the first result shattered all expectations. According to the lab, Carter wasn't the father. It didn't make sense. Not to Hope, not to Carter, and not to those closest to them. But facts were facts. Or so they thought. Rumors, reactions, and pressure from all sides the moment the test result was leaked. And it didn't take long. The fallout was instantaneous. Brooke Logan, never one to stay quiet, had questions. Ridge Forrester, standing in the awkward space between support and suspicion, kept his voice calm but eyes sharp. The media pounced. Who's the father of Hope Logan's baby? Became the question of the moment. Fashion blogs speculated, fans frothed, and photographers hounded her every move. The pressure wasn't just emotional, it was political, professional, and profoundly personal. The Forrester family, already stretched thin with shifting loyalties and corporate drama, now had a potential scandal brewing in their midst. And the public wanted blood, or at least an answer. Carter tried to stay stoic. Tried to be supportive even as he wrestled with a gnawing feeling in his gut that the test was wrong. He'd been there. He knew what they'd shared. But he respected Hope's space, even as it hurt. The twist that changed everything again then came the second test. A quiet request. A different lab. A double check, just in case. Hope hadn't told anyone, not even her mother. She wanted the truth, no cameras, no pressure, no assumptions. And this time, the truth roared through loud and clear. Carter Walton was the father. The earlier result had been a lab error. An administrative mishap. A mislabeled sample. A rare but unfortunate mistake. But the damage had already begun. Trust had fractured. Rumors had flourished. And now, the real truth brought new challenges. Together again, but why? Carter was floored. Elated. Angry. Hope was speechless, caught in a swirl of emotions. Vindication. Confusion. Fear. Now they had a decision to make, not just about co-parenting, but about each other. Were they meant to be? Or were they just two people bound by a shared responsibility? Was this baby pulling them together or reminding them why they fell apart? The questions didn't have easy answers. And yet, something unexpected began to happen. In the aftermath of the corrected test results, Hope and Carter jointly decided to file a lawsuit against the lab. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. If this had happened to them, it could happen to someone else. And maybe, just maybe, standing together on this front would help them both find a sense of control again. A legal battle that rekindled old fire. The legal process wasn't fast or simple. It involved statements, subpoenas, interviews, and countless awkward run-ins with press and rivals alike. But it also meant late nights, honest conversations, shared glances that lingered a little too long. Memories resurfaced. Hope saw in Carter the man she'd always admired, steady, thoughtful, principled. He saw in her the fierce, complex, and determined woman he'd fallen for, now even stronger with motherhood on the horizon. What started as necessity evolved into something else. Maybe they weren't just fighting a lab's negligence. Maybe they were fighting for something neither of them had been ready to name. Brooke's warnings and Ridge's doubts as the news settled. Carter was the father, and he and Hope were spending more and more time together. The scrutiny intensified. Brooke was protective, as always, and skeptical. She didn't want her daughter jumping back into something just because of a baby. Ridge, too, tread carefully. His loyalty to Carter was deep, but his role as Hope's stepfather complicated things. He saw the chemistry, but he also saw the risks. Neither of them wanted to see Hope hurt again. But Hope wasn't the same woman who had once needed permission, validation, or the perfect picture. She was standing in the storm and choosing her path. This time, she was deciding not just who she loved, but who she wanted to build a life with, as a mother and as herself. Unfinished business. The more time they spent together, the more Hope and Carter realized how much had been left unsaid when they broke up. Their relationship had ended not because the feelings were gone, but because the circumstances were overwhelming. They had pulled away out of fear, not failure. Now, facing one of life's most daunting challenges, they were choosing to show up. For the baby. For each other. For the possibility that the timing might finally be right. Their talks shifted from logistics to dreams. From baby names to future plans. From court strategy to shared moments of laughter, of grief, of hope. The final question. Hope and Carter now face a crossroads. The baby is real. The truth is known. The lawsuit is in motion. Their bond has deepened. But is that enough? Is shared parenthood a foundation strong enough to rebuild what they once had? Or are they mistaking proximity for passion, duty for destiny? The real question isn't about the past, it's about what they want now. Carter wants more than to be a father. He wants a family. Hope wants more than to be a mother. She wants a partner. They're standing on the edge of something that could be beautiful or dangerous. And in true bold and the beautiful fashion, the world is watching. Will they take the leap? Or will the weight of everything pull them apart again? One thing is certain, this story is just getting started. Hope Logan and Carter Walton thought they were being smart, practical, even when they signed the contract. After everything they had been through, they weren't going to let old emotions complicate what should be a clear, responsible partnership. Raising their child. No rekindled romance. No blurred boundaries. Just two adults, united by biology and duty, navigating co-parenthood like professionals. The contract was airtight, every clause meticulously worded, every schedule mapped to the hour, every possible situation anticipated. They'd agreed on everything. The calendar rotated parenting classes, prenatal appointments, and childcare responsibilities in clinical precision. Emotional boundaries were written in bold. No romantic gestures, no mixed signals, no overnights unless medically necessary. They even outlined how and when to introduce future partners into their child's life. Years in advance. It was a masterpiece of control. But control doesn't survive long in the unpredictable world of real emotion. Especially not in the world of the bold and the beautiful. At first, everything went to plan. They met like colleagues, exchanged notes like co-managers. Ultrasound appointments were handled with polite small talk and polite distance. They both sat through the OBS consultations with their hands politely resting in their laps. But polite only holds for so long. The first crack came when they heard the baby's heartbeat for the first time. It wasn't planned. The doctor flipped the switch. The monitor filled the room with a tiny, thunderous rhythm, and suddenly they were looking at each other. Really looking. Not like co-parents. Not like distant exes. But like two people tethered to something they couldn't explain. Neither of them said a word. Neither of them had to. The contract didn't account for that sound. Then came the parenting class. A Saturday morning commitment buried in the fourth clause of the agreement. Carter showed up 5 minutes early with 2 coffees. Hope had brought her own water bottle and a clipboard. They were partners. Efficient. Effective. Until the instructor had them role-play labor support. Carter stood behind Hope, helping her breathe through imaginary contractions. His hands on her hips. His voice in her ear. The room disappeared for a moment. The instructor's voice faded. And again, they said nothing afterward. Because what could they say? The lines blurred more with every appointment, every shared moment, every unexpected smile. They sat closer. They laughed longer. They left the hospital parking lot slower. The contract, the once bulletproof plan, began to feel less like a foundation and more like a fence. And fences begged to be tested. But they didn't dare talk about it. The clause forbidding reconciliation loomed large. Not because either of them believed in it anymore, but because breaking it meant admitting what they were feeling. And neither of them wanted to go first. Then came the night that changed everything. It started with a headache. Just a routine prenatal checkup, one of many. Hope complained of dizziness, blurred vision. Her doctor took one look at her vitals and ordered immediate observation. Possible preeclampsia, elevated risk, high blood pressure. They admitted her to the hospital overnight. Just to be safe. Carter was there. He always was. The nurse asked if he'd be staying. Hope started to say no. Then faltered. Carter looked at her. She didn't speak. He nodded. I'll stay. It wasn't planned. The contract allowed for medical exceptions, but no one had expected to invoke that clause so soon. Carter sat in the recliner next to Hope's bed, trying to read a book he wasn't really reading. Hope drifted in and out of sleep. Machines beeped softly in the background. In the middle of the night, she stirred. Restless, anxious. Carter stood up, adjusted her pillow. She reached for his hand without opening her eyes. He let her hold it. Just for a moment. just until she fell back asleep. By morning, neither of them mentioned it. But something had changed. That silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded, charged. Their conversations got longer. Their glances lingered. And when they touched, it wasn't always accidental. Back outside the hospital, the real world pressed in. Brooke had questions. Ridge was watching. And the media, always circling, had begun to notice how often Carter and Hope were seen together. Whispering in hospital corridors, leaving classes late, smiling too much. Hope tried to stay focused. She kept the contract on her nightstand like a shield. But it was becoming harder to follow rules written for people who no longer existed. She wasn't the woman who needed distance. He wasn't the man she had walked away from. They were something else now. Something new. Something neither of them could define. Carter, for his part, tried to hold the line. He told himself this was about the child. That any feelings, any memories, were just echoes. But it didn't feel like an echo when he watched Hope laugh during a birthing class. It didn't feel like obligation when he put his hand on her back, steadying her through a dizzy spell. It felt like something old, yes, but also something unfinished. The contract said no romance. But real life wasn't waiting for their signatures. The tension finally snapped one rainy evening after another parenting seminar. Hope dropped her notebook, pages scattering across the car floor. Carter bent to pick them up, their heads bumped, they laughed too close. He hesitated. So did she. Quick, soft, regretful even before it ended. They both froze. The silence afterward was deafening. The rain pounded the car roof. The contract was broken. Hope didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She stepped out of the car, walked to hers, drove off. For days they avoided each other. Communication dropped to clinical texts. Schedules only. Names. Times. No warmth. But it couldn't last. Not with the baby still growing. Not with more appointments. More milestones. More undeniable proof that their lives were forever linked. Eventually, they talked. The kind of talk that contracts can't contain. Carter apologized. Hope did too. Then she asked the question neither of them had dared voice. Do you still want this to be just about the baby? He didn't answer right away. He couldn't, because it wasn't just about the baby anymore. It hadn't been for weeks. But Hope wasn't rushing in blind. She proposed something different. Not a relationship. Not yet. But a new agreement. Not one written on paper, but in real time. Honest. Day by day. Not pretending not to feel. Not jumping into something fragile. Just living, learning, parenting, and allowing whatever this thing between them was to unfold without fear. Carter agreed. Not because it was easy. But because the old way, the contract, the distance, had become impossible. They tore up the first agreement together. It didn't mean abandoning boundaries. It meant admitting that rules written in fear couldn't contain something growing out of trust. They faced the world with clearer eyes. They didn't rush into romance. They didn't make declarations. But they showed up, together. For their baby. For each other. For whatever came next. And as the due date approached, as Hope's belly grew and the nursery took shape, they stopped wondering who would break the rules. Because the rules didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the truth. They weren't just co-parents. They weren't just partners. They were a family in the making.